Hi, it's Kirby Summers, and I welcome you to my true crime podcast. Today is Thursday, January the 18th, and I just wanted to sort of restate some of the facts that people are getting wrong and or have forgotten. For this podcast, I'm going to focus on Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with Leslie Wexner. Before I get started, please like the video, and if you have not subscribed, please do so, as I am going to continue to upload fact, which has to be separated from either opinion or fiction, okay? The Epstein story is surrounded intentionally by misinformation, misdirection, and outright lies. So one of the things that one of my subscribers was sort of really spot on when he or she wrote as a comment, I think in one of my podcasts that I uploaded during the last couple of days, is that all the names are never going to be released or something to that effect. So I'm paraphrasing. But actually, that is correct. And the reason that's correct is because the Epstein documents pertaining to Virginia Giuffre's 2015 defamation lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell only includes the names of people that Virginia herself gave to the authorities during her deposition, and the names that were given by two other victims during their deposition, which was taken only to substantiate Virginia's claims. Okay. So what we have is a small period in time, and we only have names, a narrow list of names from the small, very narrow window of time. Virginia was only in Jeffrey Epstein's world for, I believe, just a shy over 2 years. Okay. She was procured allegedly by Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now in jail, while she was working as a locker room attendant. Some people refer to it as a spa room attendant. Either one is fine, at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago property in Palm Beach. Okay, so that while a second book of contacts, namely a second black book, was found after the initial black book was made public at some point during the, I believe, 2016. This too is a narrow window. And the reason is a narrow window is because during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, it was discovered by reading the household manual that these books are updated every 6 months, so that some people are removed who are no longer of any use, I would imagine, to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, while new names are put in there. So again, even the names that we see on the black books are not all inclusive. The same is the truth for the flight logs. Not all of Jeffrey Epstein's pilots submitted flight logs. He had 4 pilots. I think we have only seen a very narrow scope of the flight logs. So anyone, either in mainstream or what I'm gonna, I'm using Professor Hamamoto's favorite kind of phrase, pop-up pundits, tell you about the list, the list, the list. We're releasing all the names. That is simply not the case. We are only looking at a very narrow window. I do not believe personally that we will ever get to the bottom of, let's say, all of the people that were involved in Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's world. That said, I want to remind those of you who are new to me that Leslie Wexner, who is Jeffrey Epstein's kind of entry into this world, was a friend, a business associate of my abuser. They knew each other, of my abuser's family. I will make that correction. Meshulam Rickless. They both attended Ohio State University. My abuser's father sold Leslie Wexner 500 learner shops. The two of them remained in touch, and they're, it's sort of part of the same group of elites. So that when I became involved in July 2019, after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest, and I started to tweet, I did so from the vantage point of knowing about Leslie Wexner and knowing about, let's say, places like certain banks, and knowing about certain things such as money laundering, and knowing, of course, about the slavery that, I was part of during a period of 8 years, knowing about that world. So most people forget or seem not to know that in 1996, the New York Times reported that Leslie Wexner had provided the Manhattan townhouse located at 9 East 71st Street to Jeffrey Epstein. And when he did that, it was already fully stocked with surveillance equipment. The article in the New York Times, I'm just going to read a little bit of it before I move on to other properties and other things that Wexner transferred to Jeffrey Epstein. Visitors described a bathroom reminiscent of James Bond movies, hidden beneath a stairway lined with lead to prevent shelter from attack and supplied with closed-circuit television screens and a telephone, both concealed in a cabinet beneath a sink, wrote the Times. The townhouse is now reportedly owned by Wexner's even more mysterious protege, Jeffrey E. Epstein. Epstein, who recently loaned his jet to President Clinton, is usually seen in the company of Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of deceased publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell. After Maxwell fell off or was pushed off his yacht in 1991, it was revealed that he was working for the Israeli government and the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service. While Maxwell's ties to the Mossad are well documented, Epstein's connections are less well known. The Sunday Times quoted a New York Social Observer describing Epstein as follows: "He's Mr. Enigmatic. Nobody knows whether he's a concert pianist, property developer, a CIA agent, a math teacher, or a member of the Mossad." New York Magazine claims Epstein is the man who moves Wexner's billions around the globe. Okay, so that by the time Jeffrey Epstein moved into the largest private property in all of Manhattan, and frankly, it was large even before Wexner purchased it. But you know what Wexner did? He added an additional floor to the top of this property. It was not 7 stories. It was 6 stories when it was purchased, but Wexner went ahead and added an additional floor, and this floor became Epstein's private room where he kept a very large sauna, and frankly, the sauna had a sky roof. I don't think many people know that there was additional square footage added to already the largest mansion in all of Manhattan. In addition to the property at 9 East 71st Street, Wexner also gave to Jeffrey Epstein the mansion next door. The mansion next door, 11 East 71st Street, was given to Epstein at the same time. Before Epstein moved in, Wexner was giving a sort of like a superficial interview to one of the Architectural Digest type magazines. And when he was asked, hey, why did you buy the second mansion? He responded that he bought it to house the help, so that the maids, the butlers, all of the household help could be living right next door and available to, service the main house. This said, that house ended up being owned by none other than Howard Lutnick. Okay, Howard Lutnick is the chairman and CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald. At the time of the September 11 attacks, Cantor Fitzgerald's offices occupied the floors commencing on floor 101 all the way up to floor 105, okay, at the World Trade Center's North Tower. They were just above where the hijacked plane allegedly hit the building. None of the employees who were in the Cantor offices that morning survived the attacks. 658 of Cantor's 960 employees died that day, including Lutnick's brother, Gary Lutnick. Lutnick has told the media from the time of the 9/11 attacks that the reason that he survived is because on that morning, he was taking his son Kyle to his first day at kindergarten. The other property that Leslie Wexner gave to Jeffrey Epstein was a house on his like let's say the New Albany development that Jeffrey Epstein is said even by Wexner to have helped him build, so that Wexner has a ginormous mansion, the largest house in all of New Albany, and perhaps, quite frankly, in all of the United States. And on the property, he has a townhouse. The townhouse is reported to be approximately 80,000 square feet. It's sort of like a guest house, and that is the house that was provided to Jeffrey Epstein. And frankly, there was another property that I'm not going to get into on this podcast, also in New Albany. Well, here's the thing. It was purchased back from Wexner for I think it was 7.95 million. It's 7 point something million. The number escapes me right now. But what does Jeffrey Epstein do with this money? He turns around in 1998 and for $7.95 million, so kind of exactly the same amount of money, which should be a red flag to all of you, he turns around and he purchases Little St. James. Okay? It's a 72-acre body of land, and Epstein went ahead and he outfitted the island with really large and tall palm trees, multiple buildings, a helicopter pad, an area for a submarine. Nobody seems to even mention the submarine, okay? And this is what has been dubbed as Orgy Island. But this is just one of the many properties that Jeffrey Epstein owned. I was surprised during my Ask Me Anything, which I host on my Patreon every month, that one of my really amazing followers did not know that Jeffrey Epstein owned an apartment in Paris. He owned an 8,000 square foot apartment in Paris. And again, on another podcast, I will cover properties that have not really been discussed by anyone owned by Jeffrey Epstein. But I just want to get back to the Wexner connection having to do with properties owned by Jeffrey Epstein. The other property that was given to Epstein, which eventually became owned by Jeffrey Epstein's younger brother of 2 years, Mark Epstein, who has recently been in the news alleging that his brother was murdered and did not commit suicide, is the property at 301 East 66th Street. It is theoretically owned by a company named OSA Properties, technically owned by Mark Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein's brother. However, this property also belonged to Leslie Wexner, okay? The people who have lived at the 66th Street location include Eva Anderson, who is married, as you know, to Glenn Dubin, who was very close to Leslie Wexner, and who, frankly, Dubin's family worked with my abuser's family, Mishullam Rickless, before going to the Wexner and Epstein kind of like symbiotic circle, I'm going to call it. All right. Also, his former business partner, and when I say his, I mean Epstein's, MC Square Models founder, Jean-Luc Brunel, who is also said to have committed suicide in his jail cell. However, Jean-Luc Brunel, as all of you know, was responsible for bringing in a lot of the foreign models, and I'm using the word models in quotes because models was a euphemism for you know what in this entire Epstein saga. They too were housed by Brunel. 4 women, sometimes girls, some of them as young as 14, 4 per apartment. Each one of them was charged $1,000 by Jean-Luc Brunel to be housed in these apartments. Another person who was a frequent visitor and who was seen by the people who lived in the building was former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. All right. There are approximately 200 units at the property. Most of these units, according to property records and court filings, are owned by OSA Properties. However, again, according to court documents, Jeffrey Epstein effectively controls these apartments, despite the fact that his brother Mark is the owner of record. And the ownership, if you were to pull up, and I did this on my Patreon, so if you want to go become a member and start looking at the information I've uploaded there, you'll see that I list how that specific property, how it has been sort of like it's gone from one corporate entity to another, to another, to another, and how you can sort of like see how Wexner is still included in this. Here's a really interesting thing that I believe close to nobody has paid attention to. And that is, when did Jeffrey Epstein meet Leslie Wexner? We know that Jeffrey Epstein was given power of attorney by Wexner. And people were like, well, why did he do that? Is he blackmailed? In my opinion, and knowing a lot about Wexner, connected to the Ricklisses and all of that, it's my personal opinion based on research, not just because I have an automatic opinion, because we're trying to keep this based on facts. Okay, we need to stay focused on facts. But Wexner is too powerful of an individual, not just because of his connections, which were very well written about by a reporter in Columbus, Ohio, back in the 1990s, when Epstein and Wexner were really very tight in Columbus, Ohio. So Bob Fitrakis covered that very well. He received death threats for reporting on Jeffrey Epstein. During the time that Jeffrey Epstein was living in Columbus, Ohio, his other partner, Stephen Hoffenberg, was already in jail. One of the things that Hoffenberg did during the time that he was in jail was try at the sort of like after the fact to get released from prison. And what he did was to offer the government a deal. He said that he knew who was responsible for the 1985 murder of Wexner's then attorney and CPA, Arthur Shapiro, who was, if you've been following the story, then you know that Arthur Shapiro was murdered execution style in 1985. He was an attorney who had a law firm in the same building as Wexner's The Limited in Ohio. The firm was then known as Schwartz, Shapiro, Kelm, and Warren. All right. At the time that there was an investigation relaunched into the murder of Shapiro, the authorities, although the record was said to have been ordered to be destroyed, a copy of it, thank goodness, ended up with Bob Fitrakis. We know from those records that Wexner was connected to high-level mob associates, allegedly. So here we are, we have a man with high-level mob associates, with connections to intelligence, somebody who always had politicians visit him at his homes. Among these, George W. Bush made numerous visits to Leslie Wexner's home. And I'm just going to insert this. During the time he was president, which is the same time that Jeffrey Epstein was given the non-prosecution agreement. I'm going to have to underline that. If you have to go back and listen to this sentence again, I urge you to do it as many times as you can so you can see the subcontext of what I'm trying to say to you. Okay, so Hoffenberg tries to make a deal with the government saying, hey, I know who killed and who was responsible for the murder of Arthur Shapiro. And Hoffenberg pretty much was pretty clear. I spoke with Hoffenberg several times. And while I never believed everything he told me, I looked at the court documents at the time that he was trying to make this plea deal to get himself released from prison. And I believe him in that aspect, that he was told by Epstein that he had a hand in the murder of Arthur Shapiro. It doesn't end there. In the documents that were supposed to be shredded and destroyed in Columbus, Ohio, among the people that were thought to be responsible for the death of Arthur Shapiro, according against to police documents, internal police documents, was Jeffrey Epstein. He was considered a person of suspect, not only in the murder of Arthur Shapiro, but get this, in the murder of Robert Maxwell. Yes, Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine's father. He was considered a suspect. Did anything happen to Jeffrey Epstein, who was considered a suspect in the murder of Arthur Shapiro? No, nothing happened. So that when Vanity Fair wrote a story claiming that Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner met either in 1986 or 1987, it's kind of clear, according to other documents, right, that they met before this. And it's become clearer as time passes and we see more documents that a lot of the people who allege, oh, I never met Epstein, he wasn't my friend, or I met Epstein on such and such a date. Case in point, Bill Gates has claimed, or the New York Times has basically written that Gates met Epstein in 2011. No, it happened much earlier. So a lot of the dates that the public has been given are actually much earlier. It's just that people change their dates. Okay, so in the recently revealed documents from Virginia Giuffre's 2015 lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell, Wexner's name appeared more than 45 times. More than 45 times. That's a lot of times. Wexner is one of the world's wealthiest men. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, he was said to have been worth $6 million. He founded the Limited in 1963, and it marked the beginning of a retail empire that included Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, Abercrombie and Fitch. And by the way, you know, the people who have worked, the models, the male models who have worked at Abercrombie and Fitch have also filed a lawsuit for harassment of the nature that is included in the Epstein case. So here's the thing. When Epstein was arrested in July of 2019, Wexner made a beeline to his PR people, had a statement uploaded to the website of L Brands, and basically said that he had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein's plea in Florida to the charges of soliciting sex from a minor. All right. He then wrote a letter again in 2019 to the Wexner Foundation claiming that Epstein had misappropriated significant sums of money from him and his family. He accused Epstein of stealing tens of millions of dollars. And here's the thing. He never submitted any documentation to substantiate these claims. He never filed a lawsuit against Epstein to substantiate these claims. Pretty much all he did was express his deep regret over his association with Epstein, stating that he would never have imagined the harm Epstein caused to so many people. He asserted that he completely severed his ties with Epstein 12 years before the 2019 arrest, and that he would not have continued working with somebody capable of such reprehensible behavior. However, the recent court documents that have been released have, of course, propelled Wexner back into the limelight. If we're going to look at Wexner, I think it's important to look at him in the context of the very first mansion that Epstein moves into is already equipped with surveillance equipment. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is that the person who handled the surveillance equipment for Epstein's properties, multiple properties, including the equipment that he had on Little St. James, was a person who lived in Ohio with Leslie Wexner. This too is part of the court record. Let me see if I even have his name. I have his name somewhere, but it might take me a while to go over 100 pages of notes that I had for today's, short podcast. I want you to know that my podcasts that I upload to YouTube contain information that is substantiated by court documents and information that I've learned firsthand via the time that I was part of that world of the uber elite for, a good number of years, and what I heard firsthand, what I saw firsthand, what I experienced firsthand. What I write about on my Substack, I can go deeper in my articles on Substack than I can do on this platform. And again, I see a lot of people asking questions, and I do host an Ask Me Anything on my Patreon every month, where that's kind of where I can answer some questions in a much more a clearer fashion than I can answer questions here on this platform. Just this morning, the court released two additional documents that nobody, again, not even mainstream media, has bothered to follow. And among these documents are two orders of appeal. The orders of appeal, one of them was filed by Virginia Giuffre, and the second order of appeal was filed by interveners Julie K. Brown and the Miami Herald. What was interesting to me when I saw these orders of appeal is that Virginia's, the documents that she's contesting are different than the documents contested by Julie K. Brown and the Miami Herald. And for reasons unknown to me, not even mainstream has covered this story. In any event, I'd love to, I try to read all the comments and the things that you add to the information that I provide. Please, again, take a moment to like the podcast and subscribe. Okay, guys, have a good day. Bye.